Hello and welcome. You're tuned into the best in paranormal talk radio. This is Darkness Radio. I'm your host, Dave Schrader, along with me, Tim Dennis. Tim, it's always cool when you get a chance to connect with other hosts, and we have talked to many of them through the years, right? Todd Sheets from Night Watch, and of course our buddy Jim Harold from the Paranormal Podcast. George Norrie has been on the show. Ian Punnett has been with us, and we have talked to so many fascinating hosts of programs to get their take on the paranormal, the different slights, if you will, to how the supernatural is perceived. And I got an interesting press release regarding a show called Hillbilly Horror Stories, which features a husband and wife duo, professional comedian Jerry Paulley and his wife Tracy Paulley. They started sharing paranormal tales from around the globe. And I just thought this was fascinating, and the fact that the show's called Hillbilly Horror Stories. I've been picking on Shane Pittman for years since we started working on Holzer Files together about the hillbilliness of a lot of his comments, and he goes, "Man, you just watch The Hillbillies Will Rise," and now apparently he was correct. They just celebrated with Hillbilly Horror Stories their 11 millionth download, so congratulations for that. But joining us on the show is Jerry Paulley. He is here to talk to us about some of his favorite stories, his own accounts. And Jerry, we appreciate you spending some time here with us today.
Oh, it's an honor. You guys were one of the first podcasts that I ever started listening to when I discovered these things about 6 years ago.
Oh, very cool. Well, thank you. I'm glad that you enjoyed the show, and that helped give you the inspiration to move on and open up your own. That's awesome.
Yeah, I was excited when you guys, one of the things that I noticed about you guys that you did things outside of just podcast. I think when I really started getting into the show, you guys were getting ready to do a trip to Europe, I think Ireland, to check out some castles and stuff. And I'm like, man, how cool is this to be able to have a fan base that can just pick up and travel with you over to Europe. I just thought that was incredible, and that was very inspiring.
Yeah, it's been a great opportunity to get a chance to see, haunted spots all throughout the United States and around the world. So it's been an exciting journey for us. Now, you released a book in October 2020 called Hillbilly Horror Stories from Hell to High Water. And you discuss everything from the paranormal to your own battles with depression and suicide, which we've talked openly about on this program as well. So I felt there was a kindred spirit here.
Yeah, that was something that, I talk about in the beginning of the book. Anytime you do stuff with the paranormal, or you're dealing with stories with the paranormal, people tend to want to approach you and say, hey, let's write a book. But what I always said was, I technically write a little mini book every week when we do our episode. And I didn't really feel like I had anything to contribute as a book. I mean, I could have rehashed a bunch of old stories that have been redone to death. And hell, I'm not an author by any way, shape, or form. So, I'm not going to be able to do the books justice as what somebody else who really had a knack for writing could do. So I didn't feel like I had anything to offer book-wise. And then, a couple of years ago, really about 4 years ago, we started talking about suicide on the show. And I had a suicide attempt in 2001 after struggling with depression and a divorce. And we started talking about the suicide forest in Japan, and it just kind of drove me to give out the suicide hotline. And then I just instantly started going into my story. Wasn't planned, but that's the way it happened. And ever since that episode, that was episode 16, and we just finished 277 of our regular show. We've given out that suicide hotline, and we've talked about depression ever since. And as far as that part of it, I kind of figured maybe I do have a story to tell. And, as time has went on with the podcast, we've had so many people write us and say, hey, because you've talked about this openly, it's had me actually go out and seek help. Or people that have actually been on the verge. We've had people say that they actually had a rope out and was just thought about something that we had said and decided not to hang themselves, or not to drive off a bridge was another one that we had gotten. And so I thought, maybe we can talk about my paranormal experiences and then my battles with depression, and then talk about how we've used our podcast to combine the two and help people. And that's really what the book is. It's in 3 different parts. It's my battles with my own personal demons, which is more of a depression than actual real demons in the sense, and my paranormal experiences. And then we talk about the podcast and what it means to people. And I felt like that the book was very open. I told a lot of things about myself that I felt like that most of our listeners wouldn't know. I didn't feel like I was a good husband in the past, and I didn't feel like I was a good father. And I was never an abusive physically person to my ex-wife, but I definitely had a mouth on me, and I definitely said a lot of hurtful things. And you know, in the end, the divorce that I went through that cost me everything was basically my fault. And I used that as a learning experience. And I thought I could share those things with the listeners and let them know that, hey, the version that you see today is not the version that I was 20 years ago, and that you can be a better person if you really want to and you put the effort into it. So I thought by opening myself completely up and giving people that version of me, they could maybe have some hope that they could change their life if they needed to.
That's awesome. What a great way to use that platform to reach out to others. Now, I'm curious, you know, obviously Tim and I have been very open about depression and anxiety and those things. Do you think that having those issues makes you more open to elements of the supernatural?
I think definitely for some people. I don't think it's as I don't find myself to be super open to the paranormal. I mean, obviously belief system, but I don't think it makes me more of a target or easier to see things. And I only say that because my experiences in the haunted house that we had, looking back, there was about a 5 years worth of experience, and my dad still lives there 30 some odd years later, almost 40 years later. And they still say they see some things, but we had basically a 5-year patch. And I look back, I think it was more of a poltergeist type activity that my mom maybe was bringing on unbeknownst to her, because she was really going through a lot of struggles. And I cover all that in the book and how it comes into it. But I didn't realize until years later, actually, it's when I started doing this show and researching paranormal activity and the different types, that I think maybe that was more something my mom was causing than a haunting, which I didn't realize back then. So if that was actually the case, I probably really wouldn't that open to seeing stuff. If it's there, it's there. And if it was something physically that was being caused by my mom, and it would be something that any of us could see whether we were open or not. But, you know, Dave, we've had the privilege to, while doing this show, to spend the night in a Sally house, which, you know, the paranormal investigators out of Nebraska that night were so spooked they didn't even spend the night, and they were supposed to. And yet I had no experiences there. You know, I've been to Waverly. I've been to Bobby Mackey's on numerous occasions. I never tend to have any experiences in any of these places. So that's why I say I don't really consider myself to be super open to seeing things.
Hey, Tim, does that sound familiar?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, Tim at times will say he feels like he is the opposite of a paranormal magnet. You know, while people are having weird shit happen all around him, it just doesn't always seem to trigger for him. Doesn't stop his interest and fascination with the paranormal, but that's
not
something.
at all. In fact, I'm trying not to. Dave says at times he thinks I'm a little negative about it, but honestly, I kind of cool down a paranormal scene, and I've been known to do it more than once. In fact, I have an interesting story about Ohio State Reformatory, in that there's a group doing an EVP session, and I said, okay, I'm going to go walk away. And people were like, well, why are you walking away? I said, just, you know, do your thing. I'm going to go walk away so you can get what you're going to get. And they were like, that doesn't make any sense. I said, no. I'm going to go over here. And they kind of looked at me like, you know, like I'm crazy. So I went and I walked around the corner. I went and took a walk, and, you know, people are starting to get stuff. And they said, well, Tim, this is just stupid. Just come over here and, you know, we're getting stuff. Come see what we're getting, you know, come over here and participate with us. I said, okay. So I stood there, and nothing. People were getting nothing. I mean, for, you know, we did sweeps. We had 2-minute sweeps, and we probably did 3 or 4, and nobody was getting nothing. I said, all right, guys, I'm going to go take another walk. And they're like, well, why? And I said, because I'm a cooler. I'll shut you down. And they said, no, it's all in your mind. And now it's like a group, it's a group psychosis thing where you're putting it on everybody else. And that's what's happening here. I said, no, it's not. It's just that it happens.
Well, it definitely doesn't ruin my enthusiasm to go places because I would spend, every second of every day in a haunted location. But even though I don't expect to experience anything, it's just the coolness of knowing that you're there and the history behind the places. So it doesn't dampen my spirits any when I don't experience something.
It doesn't dampen mine either. And I'll tell you one other thing. I actually, the other thing that happens with me too is, and again, people think this is nuts, but I actually get, and this happened at Ohio State Reformatory as well, I actually get shadow people to run from me. They take off running. And Chip Coffey and Tina Mattingly, when we were at
Waverly Hills.
Yeah, Waverly Hills, they actually pulled me along and we were chasing after shadow people because they were running from us. I finally figured that out, Tim. It turned out the shadow people had McRib sandwiches and heard about you and I and refused to share them. Of course, I would chase them down, tackle them, and beat them up for a McRib. Yeah. But it's happened to me at Ohio State Reformatory. It's happened to me at Waverly Hills. It's happened to me in Minnesota. But yeah, shadow people don't stay around for me. So there you go.
Well, I love that we all have the infinity for the McRib because that literally is something that I can't wait for. As soon as it comes out, I'll eat 30 of them before it's done.
Right. No, that's what really connects us. It's not the depression and anxiety. It's the McRib. It's eating that magical unicorn and Bigfoot mix of meats that have been pulverized into one tasty, delicious barbecue sandwich that really opens you up to the supernatural. That's the way I figured it out, at least.
I've knocked down 24 already.
And he's talking about since yesterday, folks.
Yeah.
Well, let's Jerry, let's dive in now. Your experiences with the paranormal, have you had any specifically that you can't deny that you weren't a repellent towards?
Oh yeah, without a doubt. Like I said, there was a lot that we can get into when I lived in the house. That was during the age of like 13 to 18. So let's start there. Let's start with my very first paranormal experience.
Yeah.
And I'll walk you through a few, and feel free to interrupt whenever, because when I get on a roll, I start to go. So, but we move in this first house. We're about approximately 1981. I'm 13 years old. The first year we're there, there's absolutely nothing that happens. Here's where it all starts changing, though. My mother was raised by her grandparents, so which were my great grandparents, and about a year into being in this house, my great grandfather died of cancer, and this was devastating to my mom. More so than you would think a death would be. I mean, it's always usually tragic in the moment and shortly after, but it's usually something we tend to get over, and that was not the case with my mother. And a couple weeks after he had passed away, she had been into a deep depression. This was back in the early 80s, and people didn't look at depression the same way back then. You just, that's when you would just tell people back then, just get up and go do something fun. Like you could just walk it off like a baseball injury or something. And, I didn't know what depression was back then. I just knew that my mom was different. My mom was very active and outgoing, and she used to sing in the car all the time and just, grab us up, and we'd just take an impromptu trip to Mammoth Cave, which we were from Louisville. So that was about, an hour and 15, 20 minutes away, but we would just do that on a whim. That was my mom. And after my grandfather passed away, that everything kind of changed as far as that. And I can remember a couple weeks after he had passed, we're sitting in the living room. We're next to each other on one side, and across the room is our console television. She's on the prayer line with the 700 Club. And, like a lot of people, even though my mom was religious, we were raised Catholic. She wasn't so religious that she went to church all the time. We went to all the major holidays, that kind of religious. But during this emotional time, she became very religious, and she's reading the Bible all the time. And she's on the phone with the 700 Club this night. And across from us on that television, which was probably, I'd say, a good 10 feet away from us, there was a little chair that sat on top of it. Now, this was a pin cushion, actually, but it was shaped like a chair. And on that little pin cushion, there was a bottle of Elmer's glue and our house numbers from outside. So there were 3 metal house numbers. It was weighted down. As she's on the phone with this prayer line, this chair pops up in the air, probably a good 1.5 feet, 2 feet, and it lands about 4 feet out in the middle of the floor. So it didn't fall off. It popped up and just landed. And she just tells the people on the prayer line she's got to go. She looks at me, I look at her, and we just had that look of, did we just both see that? And it was obvious that we had. And that was the very first incident we had. Now, I went to bed shortly after that. My sisters had already been in bed. My dad was in bed long before he got up early. So we were the only two up at the time. I would say it was probably about 9:30. I go to bed. It's roughly 10:30. She comes into my room and says, hey, I'm hearing something in the living room, in the attic. Can you come up and sit with me? My mom was not a person that scared very easily. She grew up with Native American relatives that had all kinds of stories that she bought into. This was just something that was part of life for her. So she was not scared of ghosts or anything like that. So I go sit in the living room with her. She says she's hearing something that sounds like wood moving on wood, as if like a heavy piece of furniture scooting across a wooden floor.
Sure. Yeah.
She says this is up in our attic. Now, our attic at the time did not have flooring. It just had the beams, and it's not enough room to really stand up. So you basically could get halfway in and put a box or two across the beams up there, and that's it. And that's all we used it for. So there was no furniture or anything up there. I sit with her for probably 15 minutes. I hear nothing. So I go back to bed. Now, the very next evening, we're back in that same situation. She comes in, wakes me up at night. Hey, can you come sit with me? I'm hearing those noises again. Now, this time, I barely make it to the living room. And I hear the same noises. It literally sounds like something scooting across the wooden beams. And I sure as heck wouldn't go check it out. I'm not like the people in the horror movies. I'm just going to, we'll wait and see the next day what's going on. But those were the first two real instances of paranormal activity in the house. And that eventually would get into, I would hear voices through the ductwork in my bedroom. And I could always make out that it sounded like 2 males and 1 female, and they were having a conversation, but it always seemed muffled and whispering. So I could never really tell what was being said, but I could make out 3 distinct voices, if that makes sense. And it kind of freaked me out. I mean, I'm a 13, 14-year-old kid at this point. And I went out and started working odd jobs, mowing grass, babysitting for the neighbors across the street to earn money. And I went to Kmart and bought a stereo system that I put right next to my bed so I could turn it on and drown out noise anytime that happened. That was, I don't know if too many people have used ghosts in their house as a sole inspiration to go out and get a job, but that's what I used mine for.
Well, no, okay, so you hear these 3 distinct ghost voices, but I understand getting the stereo system. I had one in myself as a teenager and played many a record to try and drown out. Actually, it was my sister's, not ghosts. But those 3 voices, to you, did they sound familiar? Did it sound like once you started getting, because we all have a sense, right? When you hear a voice, after a while, you become somewhat desensitized to it. I mean, it's scary, don't get me wrong, but you start to get a familiarity to it when you hear it, even though it's scary. Did it sound like it might have been a familiar voice, or did it sound like an unearthly voice, or did it sound like, did it sound human? Did you get a feel for what these 3 voices were, or where they might have come from?
It 100% sounded human.
Okay.
And no, it didn't sound like anybody I knew, but at the same time, it was more like whispers. So it would have been hard to tell if it sounded familiar or not. But I don't feel like it was somebody that we knew. Don't really even looking way back and stuff we found out later about the house, I really don't have any answers as to what that origin could be. I just could tell that it was definitely two men and a female voice. That's the only thing I could really use to separate. And like I said, the men's voices were even different, to the point where I could tell they were different, but not recognizable, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. Now, here's the $100,000 question. Did you ever go back and study the history of the house and figure out if there was somebody, maybe, I hate to say this, buried in the basement, or somebody that was buried on the property, that maybe that was a ghost of somebody there?
Well, we didn't go back and research, because obviously in the 80s, no internet, we wouldn't have had a clue how to do that back then. I know now, but I wouldn't have back then. But we did have some psychics come in from the University of Louisville and tell us what they thought it was. And it was something along that lines. They actually said that it went back to the pioneer days.
Okay.
And that it was, I guess, a father whose daughter became pregnant out of wedlock. He was so mad that after the baby was born that he actually killed the husband and the wife and the baby, and they were all buried on the property. And, you know, we didn't tell them anything that we were experiencing other than we were experiencing things, and we left it up to them. One of the things we had been experiencing was a baby crying in a hallway area that we had. And for them to mention that, it almost gave a little bit of credibility. But anytime you're in a situation where you're just dealing with somebody telling you what they feel like happened, even if it's a medium or psychic, it just, there's still no proof that that's what it is. But they did say a lot of things without us giving them information that was pretty close to some of the stuff that we were having, as far as the areas where we were having problems.
Interesting. Wow. Okay. And now this is going to sound weird. How did you just say Louisville again? Please say you said it. I
say Louisville.
Yes.
And I know that's completely out of the norm. And
no, it isn't. You know. No, it isn't. Okay. Because I have a huge pet peeve, and just bear with me here. I have a huge pet peeve because I'm French. I have a French Canadian background. It's not King Louis, right? Right. It's King Louis. It's King Louis, actually. So it's Louisville. Right?
Well, and I'm 100% with you. And, you know, I got a little bit of hick in me, and I don't do the best pronunciations and stuff. But I feel like, you know, right outside of Lexington, where I live, there is a city that we affectionately call Versailles. And it's Versailles. And it just drives me crazy that we call it Versailles.
That's right. It's Versailles.
What are you going to do?
It's Versailles, and it's Louisville. And Muhammad Ali was not the Louisville Lip. He was the Louisville Lip. And it's a Louisville Slugger. It's not a Louisville Slugger, right?
Well, they've made a living selling shirts with 15 different pronunciations on it, so who am I to argue?
Sorry, that just happens to, you know. That just happens to kind of rile me up a little bit. Sorry, Do you want me to tell you the scariest thing that ever happened to me in the house? Please, let's get back to that. Yeah, let's get back to the scariest thing that happened in the house.
Because most of the stuff, you know, you had mentioned, getting a familiarity and getting used to stuff. You know, and kind of that's what happened. It sounds silly, but I've heard a lot of people say it since. You know, we didn't feel threatened in the house for the most part. It was crazy stuff. And like even the whispers and stuff, you just learned to live with it. I mean, it's part of it. One of the sections in my book is called Learning to Live with a Ghost, because there was a time where you just felt like you were just all co-inhabiting the place and it was no big deal. But my freshman year, I was laying in bed. It's very early, 6 o'clock in the morning. It's in September. I remember this distinctly because this was the day of the St. X Trinity football game. I was a freshman at St. X. This is one of the biggest football rivalries in the country, and it was my very first one. Going to school there, I was excited, to say the least. Mm-hmm. So I'm laying in the bed. Weather's calm. Nothing to, you know, be alarmed about. It's a nice day, supposedly. I'm laying in bed, and I start hearing something tap on my window, which is literally right beside my head. So I hear something tap on the window, almost as if you had taken a quarter and just tapped on the glass. Tap, tap. It was spread out.
Okay.
And then I hear something, and I know this sounds crazy. It's a good thing this is audio. I can only describe what I'm hearing as some kind of a sick animal, and I always thought of it as a sick cow. And I say that because I hear something that sounds like a moo, but it was distorted. So as I'm laying there hearing this tapping, then all of a sudden I hear moo. And I'm thinking, what in the heck is that? I'm a freshman in high school, and I know we live in a semi-rural area, but it's still a suburb of Louisville.
Mm-hmm.
And I have no idea what that could be. So I rationally start going through animals that are in our neighborhood, because it's not a dog. So I thought, hey, there was a guy down the street. He had a donkey. That could be fathomable. And I'm literally just going through all this stuff in my head.
Mm-hmm.
These moos become closer together. Then I started hearing a moo, moo. And I'm kind of a little bit scared. Okay. I turn my radio on. That's my fail-safe.
Yes. Yeah.
And then I start hearing that tapping on the window again. Tap, tap. And then I hear the moo really loud. And then something slams into my window.
Oh, no.
I jumped out of bed. My heart was racing. I ran into my living room, and I just stayed there in my dad's recliner until it got daylight. And then I went out there and checked, and there was absolutely nothing outside that could have been causing the tapping. And there was nothing outside that could have been causing the noise, which by that time it could have been gone. But I don't know what any of that was. There was no wind. The weather was fine. So I have no idea what was causing that. But that was the most scared that I've ever been in that house. And to this day, I have no logical explanation for what it was.
I don't blame you. You know, at that age, you tend to think as an adult, you would think, well, just go out there and look. But at that age, you are not thinking just go out there and look. That is not the mindset of
no, absolutely not.
No. Although even if it were, even if it were worst case scenario, if it were a cow, just a cow is a big animal. You're not gonna, go toe to toe with a cow. I'm just saying. So let me ask you this, Jerry. I want to get back to a point that earlier in the program, you and Dave were talking about, and that's this. And then we'll take a quick break, and then we'll come back and talk a little bit more about Hillbilly Horror Stories. You were talking earlier about being a little bit of a cooler, a paranormal cooler. I want to ask you this about getting paranormal activity on a higher level. And I find this out about myself. Okay. Now I can put down a paranormal device, a recorder. I can put down a camera, and I can walk away. And I'll relate this to an experience that I've had. I was investigating with a group, and I was in Gettysburg, and we were investigating at a house. And I walked away into a corner of a house, and they were gathering EVP in a kitchen area, and I was over in a living room area. And they got some really odd EVP, but they hadn't reviewed their EVP until they got home. I got a phone call that said, "Tim, you got to hear this. This is just disturbing," right? Now, supposedly there had been some demonic activity in the home at one point. I had known nothing about it because, of course, I got nothing on my recorder. When I got home and I got a call from one of the investigators, she said to me, "Listen to this EVP." And on this EVP was this deep demonic growl that said, "I'm going to kill that Dennis. F Dennis. Blah, 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 blah. I'm going to kill him." Right? I'm like, oh, wow, that's some pretty good threat you got there, and I'm kind of laughing because I'm across the country. What are you going to do now? that's a kind of a brave stand to take when you're on the telephone.
Right.
So I guess I'm going to ask you, Jerry, do you get, in your experience, do you tend to get either the deeply demonic in your experiences, or do you tend to get the angelic? Do you get the extremes when it comes to your experiences?
I would say my experiences, and keep in mind, we don't do a lot of paranormal investigating. We go on a couple of investigations. That's not my area of expertise. We normally just go to places and spend the night just for the sake of doing it and let other people do what they're accustomed to doing. Mm-hmm. So, like I said, I haven't had any experiences other than a Ouija board story I got from my high school days, and that instance at the house that I would consider to be demonic.
Okay.
But I do have a very awesome story that changed my life that I consider to be angelic. More specifically, my mother sending a couple of bikers my way that I had never met before. And that's a story that we can get into after the break if you want.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's take the break right now. The name of the book is Hillbilly Horror Stories. We have a link to it in the description of the show. Our guest is Jerry Paulley. When we come back, we'll talk about that angelic experience with Jerry Paulley right after this. You're listening to the best in paranormal podcasting. This is Darkness Radio. Welcome back to the best in paranormal podcasting. This is Darkness Radio. I'm Tim Dennis. Our guest is Jerry Paulley. The book is Hillbilly Horror Stories, and if you want a copy of the book, and of course you should go get a copy of the book, it is available in the description of the show. We have a link for it, and you, by all means, go click it right now and pick up a copy. Jerry, before the break, you were telling us that you have an interesting angelic story for us, and it involves your mom?
It does. So, one of the things I get into the book, and like I said, I don't consider myself an author, and our podcast is more the medium that most people know us from, but I do have some interesting stories in the book.
Okay, and tell us real quick how we can find your podcast again.
Anywhere you listen to Darkness Radio, you're going to be able to find us for the most part. We're on all the major platforms. It's Hillbilly Horror Stories, and like I said, you can find us. And then, of course, we've got our website, hillbillyhorrorstories.com. You can find everything on there, too.
Okay.
So my mother and I had a really close bond through life. And it was, different situations like if I split up with a girlfriend that I go into in detail, but I split up with the girlfriend. I come home. My mother doesn't know I split up with a girlfriend. But as soon as I walk through that door, she's like, tell me what happened. I didn't even have a chance for her to even look in my face to see that I was upset. She just knew. And, a lot of people call that, mother-son intuition. That seems to be more common than mother-daughter intuition. And we had that kind of bond to where she always kind of knew if something was wrong. And one of the stories that I always tell, for example, is I was at a mobile home at a friend of mine, and this is pre-cell phone days. We're talking 1986. Mm-hmm. So it's me and another friend. We're probably 5 minutes from my house. It's literally right up the road. And we're sitting talking to a couple of friends of ours that live there. And as we're in the living room, we hear a big, something fell off of a shelf or something, made a lot of noise. We go into their laundry room, and there was a big bottle of liquid detergent had fallen off of a shelf and landed on top of their washing machine. So you can imagine what kind of noise that made.
Oh, yeah.
And the washer wasn't on, the dryer wasn't on. There was nothing that could have been causing a vibration. But for whatever reason, I took that as I need to get home. She didn't know where I was, so my mother didn't know where I was, so she couldn't have called. So me and my buddy Tim, we get in the car, we get back home. As soon as I get there, my mom's like, I've been trying to reach you. Your uncle got involved in a dispute, and he came out here looking for a gun, and him and your dad left and I needed to let you know what was going on. And see, those are the kind of things that would happen on a regular basis with us. She would just somehow could get a message to me through the most unorthodox ways. Now, after my high school years, my mother and I, our relationship grew apart.
Okay.
Just for various reasons. We just didn't see things eye to eye, and we tend to get into more arguments when we talked than we did, happy-go-lucky conversations. And it got to the point, Tim, where I wouldn't even answer the phone sometimes. When I look and see she was calling, I wouldn't answer the phone.
Mm-hmm.
My mom had this depression, I told you, through all the years.
Yeah. And,
from the time 82 all the way up until basically 2002, she just kept getting progressively worse, and it's illness after illness. And we all kind of felt like that this was more of a, I guess we could say, more of a mental issue than actual physical problems. Because, if you're not in the right state of mind, you can make yourself sick physically through your mental aspect.
Yeah. Yep.
And so she was constantly going in the hospital. And to be honest with you, I just didn't go most of the time to visit because I knew it was never really going to be anything real. So let's fast forward to the year that she passed away, which was basically 15 years ago. So we're looking at 2006. I'm doing comedy, stand-up comedy at the time. I've got a show in Louisville to do. I lived there at the time. And it's a sold-out show. I'm on my way down there. I get a call saying that they thought my mom might have had a stroke. They're rushing her to the hospital. I told you my thoughts on this already. This isn't the first time she's been sent to the hospital because of a possible stroke. They never turned out to be strokes in the past.
Yeah.
Something about this, though, seemed different. I got this gut feeling that I just told my dad, I'm like, I'm going to blow off the comedy show and I'm just going to come down there. And he's like, no, we're going down there. We'll keep you updated. Go do what you got to do. Because like I said, this was a sold out show. They would have had to give refunds and all that. And it's just not that easy in show business. You know how it goes when you have an event.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, okay, I go. Well, I'm constantly calling, but I knew something was different this time. Well, eventually my dad says, look, they're sending us home. They said, looks like everything's good. She's up. She's mobile. She's coherent. And they don't think it was a stroke. Okay, good. I go home. I get a call at 7:00 in the morning. You need to rush to the hospital. Okay, so I go to the hospital, and literally within 30 minutes, my mom passed away. And as she took her last breaths, I was holding her hand. It's a very emotional time, as you could remember. I can remember everything that was going on in that room. And you could feel just the guilt that was probably radiating off me for every phone call that I didn't pick up, for every time I didn't come to the hospital, for every argument that we had. And it's just something that really I struggled with. So we're going to fast forward to 6 months later. There's a little hole in the wall bar, and I literally mean a hole in the wall bar. It's probably two rooms, one of which they used for karaoke and one of which was the bar area. And I bet the whole thing wasn't 900 square feet. And I didn't realize this until years later. I thought about it, but my mom and dad and myself, we rarely went anywhere together. And one of the last things that we had actually done was probably about 4 or 5 years before that. And we had stopped into this little hole in the wall bar and played pool, which was out of the context. I think that was the only bar I'd ever been to with my parents, ever. And I was, my 30s at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said, that didn't occur to me until later. But anyway, so I'm at this bar. I'm getting ready to do my comedy show. I'm there way early. I have nothing else to do except go over my routine. And as I'm in the main bar, probably 2 hours before showtime, this couple comes in. And it's a stereotypical biker couple. And I say that, in all due respect.
Sure. But
the gentleman was probably late 40s. He had the big burly beard. He had on the biker jacket, the leather and the blue jean mix, and the cap. It was what you would think of when you think biker.
Mm-hmm.
And The woman was exactly the same way. She was in her 40s. She had, long hair. They both had tattoos. She had on the biker jacket and chaps and all that. So they walk in, and I asked them, I said, "Are you guys going to stay for the show?" Well, they weren't even aware that there was a comedy show. I'm like, yeah, okay. I said, yeah, so we're having one. I tell them the deal. And like any time you tell somebody you're a comedian, they want to start telling you jokes, right?
Right.
And, hey, here's this joke I heard. You could use this. So I'm listening to their jokes. I'm being nice. And we just talked about a few things, nothing in general. So a few minutes later, I'm like, I got to go get ready for the show. And I wanted to go over my routine, look at had my legal pad out. And I go down into the room where they do karaoke at. This is where the show is going to be. It seats maybe 25 people. And that's crammed. Mm-hmm. And I'm down there on one end of the room, and I'm looking over my notes. A few minutes later, that couple walks in and sits down on the other end of the room. Well, I felt bad just letting them sit there. I felt kind of obligated to go talk to them, you know what I mean? Because they're down there and I'm here, and I feel like I'm ignoring them, and it's rude.
Yeah. So
walk over, and we're sitting there, and we're talking about something. I can't even tell you what we're talking about. It was just, general small talk. And the gentleman says, "Hey, your mom just wants you to know that everything's okay." Well, they don't know me. They surely don't know my mom passed 6 months ago, because they didn't know who I was till 20 minutes earlier. And we didn't talk about my mom. So I'm assuming that this is another one of those jokes that I didn't get. So I did that nervous little laugh, just to kind of laugh along. Mm-hmm. And when I did, the young lady, she reached over and she put her hand on top of my hand. And she said, "No, your mom wants you to know that everything is going to be fine." And I'm telling you, Tim, I literally and emotionally lost it. I just broke down, and I just started talking to them like they knew everything that was going on. I'm like, yeah, I've got so much guilt that we just, didn't see eye to eye. And there were so many times that we fought, and I just feel so bad. And the young lady says, well, she wants you to know that she knows that you were there holding her hand when she passed. Now, there's no way they could have known that.
Right.
Tim, no way possible. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. I mean, literally almost everything that was said after that is kind of a blur. Yep. Because I was so emotionally distraught. I know we talked about the comedy thing. My mom had seen me perform one time at the Comedy Caravan up in Louisville. Mm-hmm. And they said, well, she just feels like you should be doing better than places like this. And I'm like, trust me, I wish I could be doing better than places like this, but you got to start somewhere.
Right.
And, but we just talked back and forth, and next thing you know, they got up and left, and I've never seen them again. And I have no clue what their names were. I don't know why they were there. I mean, I know that they were just stopping in on their way to go to another bar. I know that part, but I don't know how my mom was able to get a message to them. I don't know if they came there with the intention of giving me that message. I don't know if it happened once they had already arrived. I have no clue. It's the most baffling thing that's ever happened to me. And the only thing that I know about that is it told me once and for all that there is definitely a life after death. And when you feel like that, Tim, it changes your entire outlook on life, because I'm not scared of dying now, and I haven't been since that day. I may not want to die because I don't want to leave loved ones or put somebody in a bad spot or want people to grieve over me. But I'm definitely not afraid of dying because I know there is a life after death. And that entirely changed my outlook on life that day. And I'm thankful that it happened. And I've not felt like I've ever had an experience with my mother again other than my birthday. And I'll let you ask any questions you got, and then we'll get into that situation here in a little bit. Well,
I have just one, and that is, at that point, do you feel like you had that emotional release that you needed to have to let her go? Because it seems like the guilt kind of, at least subconsciously, you hadn't fully let her go yet, because you still did have the guilt over over the way you left the situation. I don't think if there's any remaining feelings, you truly let a loved one go. At least subconsciously, if there's any remaining issues. Physically, you of course have to let somebody go, but emotionally, spiritually, you can't let somebody go if there's remaining issues left behind. I think at that situation, when you ran into those two in the bar, did you feel like you had some sort of release there, that there was closure?
I did, definitely, because one of the things that they told me was, your mom wants you to know that everything's okay. Mm-hmm. And that's to hear that was big. I think, and the thing of it is, before I even heard that is when I kind of had my breakdown. And I think it was because once she said, no, your mom really wants you to know, I knew that it was her. Does that make sense? So, yeah, and just the fact that I knew that was her in that room was all it took, even without hearing her say everything was okay or any of that. It was just the point of knowing I knew that this was really happening.
Yeah, absolutely. So then what exactly happened on your birthday, that second experience there?
Well, I lived at this point probably 20 minutes up the road from my mother's house at the time. And my mother passed away in December. My birthday was in August. So this was really only a couple of months past this incident with the bikers. Mm-hmm. But I had a buddy of mine that had went to borrow some software that I had. So he was just like, hey, let's meet at this retail store, which was only 5 minutes from my house. And I meet him as I'm leaving the establishment. My intention was to go back home 5 minutes up the road. And I had talked to my girlfriend at the time, who is extremely sensitive. She actually was a member of the Louisville Ghost Hunter Society with Keith Age at one point.
Oh, okay.
But she's extremely sensitive. And we had all kinds of incidents happen, when we were together. And we had that same kind of bond that myself and my mother had, to where she kind of knew what I was thinking back and forth. And so it's my birthday. She'd already told me that we couldn't spend my birthday together. She had something else going on. Can't remember exactly what it was, but it was something to do with her children. And that was fine. Mm-hmm. So I'm leaving this retail establishment, getting ready to head right back up to my house. And I get on the phone with somebody. Well, as I'm on the phone with the person, sometimes you know how it is. You just start driving. And next thing I know, I'm literally at my dad's house on my birthday, which is 20 minutes up the road. Mm-hmm. And I didn't even realize I was driving there. Now, a lot of people will say, okay, well, I mean, that's, sometimes you just instinctually do something like that. And that would make sense, except I might not be a medium. I might not be really sensitive to just seeing stuff around me. But one thing I have always had is feelings that have a knack for coming true. And if I get a bad feeling, I'm usually right. And as I was sitting there in my dad's parking lot, I had this feeling that there was something wrong with my dad. And that's all I could think about. There's something wrong. Why else would I be here? And I call my girlfriend and I'm telling her this. And she says, I know, I'm on my way over. She was already heading in that direction and didn't even know I was there. That's spooky in its own right. Yeah. So she gets there. I go in the house. She shows up a little bit later, and I'm talking to my dad. I don't tell him any of this. My dad's not the biggest believer. Okay. And I'm just sitting there, and I'm listening to what he's saying. I'm trying to pick up on anything. I'm like, yeah, he seems fine. Why am I here? And my girlfriend shows up, and we come in and sit, and she's sitting and she's talking, and my dad had this little poodle that was my mom's pride and joy, and he's sitting there, and now everything seems to be fine. And then I leave, and she leaves, and she says, I'll call you later. So I talked to her on the phone a couple hours later after she finished what she needed to do. And I tell her, I said, you know what? I just don't understand what's going on. And I said, I'm not usually wrong about these feelings, but I definitely had a feeling. Well, then she said something I didn't even think about. She said, what time were you born? And I told her, and it was literally about that time that I had showed up at the house. And she said, did your mom always call you on your birthday at the time that you were born? And I just was like, yeah, she always called me on my birthday at the time I was born. And she wasn't around to do this. This was my first birthday. And suddenly I ended up at that house. And I told my girlfriend at the time, I was like, man, I really wished you could have met my mom. And she said, I think I did today.
Oh, wow.
And she was telling me that, she said, did you notice that the dog in your dad's lap kept looking up. And she said, your mom stands behind that recliner at your dad all the time. And, you know, the fact that I showed up there on my birthday at the time, and I didn't even realize it, what time it was. And the fact that she knew that my mom had called, it's another one of those things that's just hard to explain.
Wow. You know, I'm not trying to one up you here or anything like that. You talk about animals being able to see spirits, and when my grandfather was passing away, when the veil gets the thinnest, just a few days before they pass, my grandfather was laying in bed. He was unable to get up or walk or anything like that. He had something gets us all eventually. He was in his early 90s. And he had a tumor in his brain. But he was kind of looking out beyond the archway of his door. And I was wondering if he was looking out into the kitchen or where he was looking at. I was sitting by his bedside, and the family dog had walked in. Pedro is his name. And he kind of looked in, or, you know, came in and kind of sat by my side. He started looking out at the archway too, and he kind of had his head, you know, tilted to the side. And my grandpa started smiling as he was looking out, you know, over his bed, you know, foot of his bed, because the foot of his bed faced the archway of the door. So he could see out, you know, out into the living room and the kitchen. And so I said, well, Grandpa, what are you looking at? He said, well, I'm looking at this beautiful woman with, you know, dark raven-like hair and red ruby lips. And white alabaster skin is the way he put it. He was very poetic the way he put it. I thought, well, this isn't my grandpa. He doesn't talk like this, you know. He's kind of a simple guy. I said, okay. And I kind of playing along with him. I said, well, what is she saying? She said, well, she's telling me that she'll see me really soon. And I went, ooh, geez. And now I'm getting chills, you know, because I'm like, that's not good, you know. And just then, you know, Pedro really is starting to kind of cock his head to the side, and then my grandpa's kind of cocking his head to the side. And then they both start to look from the right to the left, like whoever they're looking at is starting to walk through the wall of his bedroom and out of the house. And at the same time, and I just like got the willies, like the chills. And I was like, ooh boy. So they both were looking at this spirit just walk through the wall of the house. And the only thing I could figure was that was his first wife, my grandma Vivian, who I never met. She'd passed away before I was born. So, yeah, I believe that. Yeah, your girlfriend was right. Your mother was there. She was there to just to wish you, if anything, just to wish you a happy birthday or be there with you on your birthday, that first birthday. That she wasn't able to be there with you physically, which is a beautiful story. It's a beautiful way to just still try to be there with you. And I don't think they ever really stop being there for you. I think they drop in on you from time to time just to, you know, just to look in on you. I mean, you know, as we continue, I think as we pass on and we continue to look in on our loved ones afterwards as well. I mean, why wouldn't we, you know?
Yeah. What else you got to do?
Exactly. What else are you going to do? You know, it's not like they put you in a coal mine up there. So
yeah, if time's infinite up there, then I mean, you know, you got plenty of time to do whatever you want.
That's right. That's right. Well, we should go to the scary part of this deal. We talk about hillbilly horror stories, and here we're getting all mushy. I know you've got the book out now. Again, we have the link on not only on the description of our show, but is there? Do you have autographed copies of the book available, Jerry?
Yeah, if they go to hillbillyhorrorstories.com, they can get an autographed copy there. There's a PayPal link that just comes straight to us, and I'll send it out. And I usually put some goodies in there. I've got matching bookmarks and some stickers and stuff like that we send along with them.
Okay, so like Dave was saying, he believes, as he was telling Shane, that the hillbilly will rise and that the hillbilly is bringing the scary. Tell us a little bit about one of the scarier stories in the book there.
All right, I'm going to tell you a story that honestly I told for the first time in the book. We've been doing this show for 4 years at the time the book came out, and everybody heard that I had a Ouija board story. Mm-hmm. And I had always, the only person who had ever heard this story was my mother, who had passed away.
Okay.
I never shared it. As you can tell, I'm pretty open about my life and paranormal and what I believe. But this story went above and beyond to the point that I felt like nobody would believe it, and I would literally be criticized for saying it. So even though we did a show about paranormal and I've discussed tons of paranormal stories, this one never got talked about. And my wife, who I've been with for 15 years, had not ever heard this story because I refused to tell anyone. That's how much this story affected me. So there's a little background to it.
Wow, you're building this up. Okay, let's hear it.
I'm building it up.
Okay.
And I'm going to tell everybody listening, just please know that I knew when I put this out that I was going to be set up for criticism.
Okay.
So just think about, why I decided to do it anyway, because I felt like it was time.
Okay.
All right, so we're going to go to New Year's Eve, 1985. I graduated in 86. I was 17 years old at the time. And this was with a girlfriend that I had that it was my first love. But she definitely did some things that I wasn't happy with. And what I mean by that was, like, I was a unique teenager growing up. I've never smoked. I've never tried a drug. I've never drank. I've had a sip or two, a beer, just to see what it tasted like. I didn't like it, therefore I didn't do it. And I've always been happy-go-lucky. I'd ask people, well, why do you drink or why do you do drugs? Oh, it just makes you feel good. And I'm like, well, I already do that. So there's no need for me to do any of that stuff. And I was lucky that I never felt peer pressure.
Okay.
So one of the things that growing up, I was an Exorcist fan. I got Exorcist stuff all over my walls and stuff, but that movie scared the crap out of me because there's something about demon possession that's just different than anything else. And for me, that's something that I just feel like you can't fight. And I think that's why that always scared me. I told you we grew up Catholic. So I had talked to priests before about Ouija boards and was pretty much told, stay away from them. Don't get near them. So that was my whole theory when it came to Ouija boards. We're going to a New Year's Eve party where there was going to be a bunch of drinking, which I should have said no to, but she was hot. And I'll be honest with you, 17-year-old boy, hot girl wants you to go somewhere, you'll drop some morals.
Oh, yes, sir.
And that's what I did. Mm-hmm. So we go to this house. On the way to the house, she wants to stop by Toys R Us, of all places, and buy a Ouija board, which I was 100% against, and I voiced my displeasure on that one. Mm-hmm. We bought it anyway because, again, same situation. We get to the house, her and a couple of friends go back in this back bedroom, and they're going to play with the Ouija board. I got out of the room. I didn't have anything to do with it. We're sitting in a room that's got a piano, and I had a friend of mine who's since passed away named Andy. This guy could play any instrument, and he comes in there, and he's playing the piano and says he's never played it before that night. He just chimes in and starts, playing along with a buddy that was playing the guitar. And he finds out that there's a Ouija board in the house, and he is up and gone. He's like, I don't have anything to do with it. Sorry, I didn't know there was one in the house, or I wouldn't have came to begin with. And he left as quick as he possibly could. And I was like, that's what I need to be doing. So at the end of the night, I'm kind of ticked off because she's been drinking, which I'm 100% against. She's got the Ouija board going, which I'm 200% against. Mm-hmm. And we leave. She's got the Ouija board. We put it in my car. I say something to her about how I didn't like either one of the situations. We kind of got into a little fight. I dropped her off at her house, and I left. I lived literally probably 7 minutes from there. As soon as you pull out of her house, there is a Kmart right there. It's almost, you could almost do it if there was, her road dead ends there. Otherwise, you could drive straight through the Kmart. That's how close it is. So I get out. I'm driving on this road, and as soon as I go, I started hearing something that sounded like a rubbing. So my thought is I had ran over a tree branch before that was stuck underneath the car, and as I was driving, it was, rubbing on the road, making that noise, and I thought that's what I had done. So I pulled into the Kmart parking lot. I get out, look all the way around. I don't see anything underneath the car. I get in, I start driving. I'm still not out of the parking lot. I hear it again. So I stop again and get out. Nothing. I even get down on the ground. I'm looking I'm looking everywhere. Nothing. I go to get back in the car and I hear this rubbing noise again, but it dawns on me that it's coming from the back seat. Guess what's in the back seat? The Ouija board.
No.
I open the door, back seat, because it's a 4-door car.
Mm-hmm.
I open the door, and there's the Ouija board sitting there. I lift off and this is the part that's going to get everybody, so just bear with me.
Mm-hmm.
I lift off the top to the Ouija board, and the planchette's right there, and it literally spells out my name. It goes to the J, the E, the R, the Y. And it scared me to death. Scared me to death. I swear upon everything that I have, all of my kids, that happened. I witnessed it with my own eyes. I put the top on it. I went over to the dumpster and I threw it in there. I drove home as fast as I could. Can't even tell you what I was thinking about other than fear. I get home. Here's another one of those coincidences. I walk in the door and there's my mom. And my mom says, "What happened?" She has no clue anything happened, but she did. Mm-hmm. But it hadn't been because I told her. That's one of those synchronicities. So I tell her the whole story. And she believed me because she believed that kind of stuff.
Okay.
And I go to bed. I wake up the next morning. I go to get back in the car. Guess what's in the back seat?
No.
The Ouija board that I had thrown away in the Kmart parking lot. There was no confusion. I threw it away. But it was there. I went to the backyard. Past the backyard of my house is some woods. And I went back there and I buried it. And as far as I know, that's where it's still at 30 years later. But that's my Ouija board story. As hard as it is, and trust me when I tell you, Tim, I know if somebody came to me and told me that story, I'd say you're full of crap. That didn't happen. And if I didn't see it with my own eyes, I wouldn't believe it. And I would still be skeptical if somebody else came to me and told me it happened today, even knowing what I know. But the bottom line is that's why I sat on that story from 1985 until literally 2020, because I know how ridiculous it sounds. And I didn't want to ruin my credibility with people. And I didn't want to come across as somebody that was making stuff up. And I definitely didn't want to come across as somebody that was a nut job, because that's the way some people look at that stuff. So that's the Ouija board story that I held on to and didn't even tell my closest relatives until last year.
No, it's very believable, and I've heard others that have said they've tried to get rid of their Ouija boards and they've come back 2, 3, 4 times. So I'm actually impressed you got rid of it on the first try. I've heard people that have tried to, although we don't encourage this, they've tried to burn them, they've tried to drown them, they've tried to. I'm impressed you got rid of it by just burying it. To be honest. But there are proper ways to dispose of them. So, but yeah, let me ask you this: Did you notice, now that hindsight is 2020? Now that you look back on it, did anything weird or malevolent happen after you buried that board? Honestly,
I don't think so.
Okay.
So that's another cool aspect of it, is, you would think that, if I was going to make the story up, I'd probably have some cool shit to happen afterwards.
Yeah. Like Satan would show up and buff out your car or something like that.
Right.
Yeah. But no, I mean, that's good that, that it ended there with just burying it. Because it could have been a whole lot worse. That's weird that it just ended with spelling out your name. I mean, but you didn't give it an opportunity to spell out anything more than just your name.
No, I wasn't interested. Trust me.
Yeah. It's not like you stuck around to see what the rest of the message was. Wow, Jerry. Yikes. Ooh, you dodged one there, my friend. That's for sure. Give us another story from the book. That's a big one. That's a huge one. I got a little chill out of that one. Give us one more.
I don't have a ton of scary stories in the book. As I said, the book's kind of in three different parts, and most of the paranormal is in the front part.
Sure.
I know there was one time that, just to give you an idea of the little things that would happen. There was one time to where I was in my back bedroom, and our house was set up. It was almost like a circle. I mean, it's a square house, but all the doors led to, the door to my sister. There was another door in the bedroom. So if I went in from the hallway to my sister's bedroom, there was another door that led to my bedroom, then another door that led to the laundry room. So you kind of made a whole circle in that back part of the house. And one time I was sitting watching the Atlanta Braves in my bedroom. And yeah, go Braves.
Yeah, go Braves. I was going to say they've had a good season.
Yeah, they did. First World Series since almost all my hauntings. It seems like it's been forever. But I was in that room, and the door was open to my sister's bedroom. Everybody was outside at our pool. I got up and started to walk through that way, and there were some toys, stuffed animals, that were laying in the floor by the door. And I picked them up and I laid them into a toy box that sat there on the wall next to the door. I go out, I talk to them in the pool. Nobody's home except for me inside. I come back in a few minutes later, and those toys that I'd put in a toy box were just laying right there back in the floor again. So the little things like that really aren't threatening were the things that happened all the time. But I will say this, if you'll be so kind as to give me the opportunity.
Sure, go ahead.
One of the things that we're so proud of on Hillbilly Horror Stories is the fact that we're trying to take down the stigma of mental illness. So like I said, we start off every episode thinking of all of our military and civil servants all over the world.
Yep.
Because without them, we wouldn't have the freedom to do what we do.
Yep.
And then we give out the suicide hotline number, and we always tell people that if they need an ear, we're not experts, but we'll sure enough listen. So don't ever think that you don't have friends or family members that don't, that care about you, because you do.
Yep.
And we've given out our own personal phone numbers. Our own personal phone numbers are on our website. So we probably talk either on phone through Messenger or email to 15 or 20 people a week who are having struggles. And we're glad to do that. We took our Facebook group. So we have a Facebook page, which is, we add all the fun stuff, show stuff. But then we have a Facebook group. It's 5,200 strong right now. It's a private group.
Okay.
And we turned it completely into a support group for our listeners.
Oh, wow.
So when you go to join our Facebook group, one of the first things it asks you is, it says, hey, you're going to see people posting about their personal difficulties. Are you okay with that? Because if we want people to have a safe place in there, and we got people from all over the world like you guys do. So it doesn't matter what time of day it is. If it's 3:00 in the morning, you're going to have somebody from Australia or Great Britain or New Zealand or South America that will be there to give you support. And that's probably the thing that we're most proud of. Yeah, we just actually hit 12 million listens. So that's went up from the time we sent out the press release. But we just hit 12 million downloads, and that's a hell of a thing to be proud of. But man, Tim, nothing will make you prouder than somebody saying something you said changed my entire life. It changed my outlook on life.
Yeah.
And I want to tell you about one of those.
Sure, please
that
do.
I'm most proud of.
Please do.
About 4 years ago, and this is when we really realized that we could make an impact. About 4 years ago, 4.5 years ago, I had an original co-host, a gentleman by the name of Ricky, great guy. But he only did 9 or 10 episodes with me, and then my wife took over. And that's really when our success started. But even back then, a young lady, we used to advertise. This is how we were just trying to get our name out there. We were advertising on Craigslist on like the rants and rave sections on different cities. Mm-hmm. That's the one place I could throw something up there for free. And I would just put, hey, listen to Hillbilly Horror Stories. And, probably wasn't a whole lot of people we got off of it. But this young lady from North Carolina wrote me, and I don't have the story in front of me, but I've read it enough where I feel like I've got most of it down. She had she told us that she was writing us because she saw us on Craigslist and she thought the name was cool, and she's not into paranormal stories, but for some reason she decided to give it a listen. And we did an episode back in the early days about dimes, how loved ones that have passed on like to communicate by leaving dimes for you to find. And a lot of cultures kind of feel that way. And she went on to tell us that she had a son that had cancer. He was 6 years old. He passed away. And she was very religious. Her and her husband and their child were a tight-knit family. But when this happened, she lost all of her faith in God. And she went into a major depression. Her marriage was falling apart. She had lost her job. And counseling didn't help. And she just kept feeling like, if there was an afterlife, if there was a God, why did he have her 6-year-old suffer? Why has he made no communication with her? So how, she had always hoped that he was at least in a better place when he passed, but she felt like that she didn't know that now anymore because she hadn't had any kind of communication from him to know that he was in a better place. So she listens to our podcast and she hears that about the dimes. And she said it dawned on her that she had found so many dimes to the point where she'd even went to her husband and said, I keep finding dimes everywhere. Then she hears the podcast and she hears that. And she said, at that point, I realized my son was making contact with me. I just didn't know that's how he was doing it. And she said that she had used that opportunity to regain her faith. She used that opportunity to start going back to counseling, and that now that her and her husband's relationship had gotten back on track, they still had a ways to go, but it was back on track. And she actually felt like that her son was in a better place now. And she basically said that we saved her life. Wow. And when you hear something like that and you're like, we're just telling ghost stories. Mm-hmm. But then you realize that doesn't have to be all that it is. It doesn't have to be just ghost stories. We have a platform to where we're reaching people. And it doesn't matter if it's, 200 people back in the day or whether it's, now we get 95,000 listens a week. Mm-hmm. And, we can use this for good. And to be honest with you, you guys know how it is. You've been doing this for, like 2006. Yep. Sometimes it just gets old. And I'm not saying that to be negative. It's just, you do the same thing over and over. You get in a rut. And there were times when we probably would have stopped doing the podcast. And it seemed like every time we would get a letter that was similar to that or an email. And it just makes you think, this is why we do this. It's not for the downloads. It's not for the financial aspect of it. This is why we do this. And that's the motivating factor. And we couldn't be happier about it. We have a big ass family, and that's the way we look at it. Every one of our listeners are family. And we were glad to be able to help them through any tough times that they may be having.
It's interesting, Jerry. You said something really interesting there, and I want to reiterate something I had told people about yesterday, and I'm going to remind people that on my social media right now, and there's a link to it on yesterday's description, there's an article that I posted on my social media yesterday, and it has to do with AEW star Eddie Kingston, who is going to be in Minneapolis this weekend for the Full Gear pay-per-view. He's taking on CM Punk. And Eddie has had a real struggle with mental illness and substance abuse. And for 20 years, he did a lot of iron work in New York City as his full-time job. And wrestling was his part-time job. But he always said wrestling was his full-time job and iron work was his part-time job. And he really struggled really hard. And he still does to this day with crippling mental illness and anxiety. And he says, I still use my Zoloft. I still need my Zoloft. And I still struggle every day with crippling anxiety, even when I go through that curtain. And one of the things that is prevalent throughout this article is he says that one voice can change the direction of where you're going. One voice can change your life at any particular time. And one thing that happens throughout this article is he's just about to give up. He's just about to give up wrestling and pack it in. At one point, his mental illness is so bad and crippling, and he's so lost in alcohol that he kind of cages himself in his apartment and tells himself that I'm going to give up the one thing I love, which is wrestling. And it's a fellow wrestler on the indie scene that writes him a letter because he wants to so be lost in his addiction that he smashes his cell phone. And his buddy writes him a letter and says, I miss my friend. And that pulls him out of it. Just that one line, I miss my friend. Not I miss my fellow wrestling buddy, not I miss my coworker, I miss my friend. That pulls him out of it. Then later on, there's another voice that comes out, another friend as he's about to, and I won't spoil the entire article, but there's another voice of a fan that tells him at an indie show when he's kind of busting his butt. He's not making enough money to even drive back home from an indie show. He doesn't have enough money to eat. He's thinking, why am I even doing this? And she's this fan who shows up to every show and yells at him and just yells horrible things at him. But after the show, as he's helping load the truck, after breaking down the ring, she says, you know what? You literally make my night. You make my month every time you come out here and you wrestle in front of me. Thank you. And that's enough to keep him going, keep him doing what he does, even though he can't afford to do what he does. People don't realize how much one sentence, one line can do to change people's perspective on things. So that's why people don't realize how much of an impact you can make on other people. So Jerry, when you say you set up this website and you set up this Facebook page, I commend you for that, my friend, because people don't realize that could actually, it could be a trap at times because people on social media can be cruel and unusual. And I don't see this in a negative way, but that's a lot of admin work because people, and I'm just going to be blunt here, people can be assholes. They
Absolutely.
Can. I mean, they can get on there and just want to troll. And especially with people who have issues, mental issues, they'll want to go on there and just be assholes to see if they can trigger somebody. And that's the wrong group of people to go after. Those are the people you want to support. Those are the people you want to show love to. Those are the people that you want to pull up and say, hey, I'm with you. I support you. Come on, let's get through this together. And there are people out there that just have no regard for human existence. I've seen it way too much in my lifetime.
We've got 9 admins that work, and one of them is in Australia, one of them is in Great Britain, and then we've got several at different time zones through the U.S. So that helps us to be able to catch stuff all during the hour. So if something does get posted by somebody that probably shouldn't be there. It's a zero tolerance with us. Good. They are not only is that gone, but it's booted. The good thing is we've got 5,000 moderators in essence, because if somebody says something bad, we've got somebody who's really quick to report it, and we've got they get ganged up on as saying, why the hell are you being such a jerk? So it is a big family, and we're very picky about who we let in. Mm-hmm. We're always looking at how long have they been on Facebook, if they want to join the group, or did they answer the questions? If you don't answer the questions, you don't get in. Yeah. And one of the questions is, what's the dog's name on the show? So it gets mentioned all the time. So at least we know they're listening to the show. Right. But like we were just featured on a local television news up here. Oh, good. And we've gotten some people that actually joined because of that. And, but we make sure that, if they don't answer the questions, we'll send them something out saying, hey, how did you find out? If they say they heard us on the news, then we go ahead and let them in. Yeah. But we also let them in with the caveat that, hey, we got strict rules and regulations. We want everybody to feel safe here. And that's what's important. And I guess getting back to the article, I just want to remind people that you have to be careful with your words. You have to realize what kind of an impact you make on people and their day, and you don't know where somebody has been or what kind of life they've led. So in Jerry's case, in my case, in anybody's case, it doesn't matter if you have a microphone, the power of a microphone, you have power. It doesn't matter what you do for a living. It doesn't matter what's going on in your day. Your voice, your words have power. So when you address somebody, anybody on the street, address them with respect, address them with kindness. And you'll be amazed how easily things flow in the world, and how your words actually will help someone in their situation rather than harm, and can turn somebody's life around. You have no idea how much just a kindness, a respect in your words will turn somebody's life around. So I guess in that, Jerry, I applaud you for the work you do and are continuing to do, which is quite good. With that, let's tell people you can go to hillbillyhorrorstories.com and check out Jerry's podcast. Check out everything Jerry has going on right now. And Jerry, you have autographed copies of the book there as well at hillbillyhorrorstories.com, correct? Yes, sir. We've got copies of the book there. We've got a section for live events. We do 3, 4, 5 live events a year. And we've got a special tab for the Hillbilly Horror Story cruise to the Caribbean, to the Bahamas, that is actually taking place in September. We've got special rates for that. You can find out all the information on there about that. Nice. Going to the Bahamas. That's That's beautiful. That's a nice. We were lucky. We signed up 200 people the first month that it was available. Wow. Look at that. That's a great time. That's a great time. You're going to have a good time down there. Well, that'll do it for this week. And again, people may be saying, Tim, why are you there and Dave's not there? Let's just explain to people real quick, Jerry. Again, Jerry Paulley, our guest this evening. It's not that I did anything with Dave and buried him in his basement. Basically, Dave is in his hotel in his undisclosed location, and the router at his hotel in his undisclosed location took a crap. So, he had troubles with it yesterday during the show, and Tuesday during True Crime Tuesday. It went down yet again. So a little bit of troubles there in the undisclosed location down there in the bunker. So he apologizes, but and he sends his regards, people, and he's very, very sorry. But he will join us again next week when actually he'll be back in studio, in his own studio. I believe he's now done filming the new series, so which I can't tell you anything about. I'm sorry. But he'll be back next week in his own studio, and things will be back to normal. And we'll have a brand new set of guests and new stuff for you next week, right here on the best in paranormal podcasting. This is Darkness Radio.